My name is Omar Saleh. I am an Imam, a servant of Allah, a man of faith who dedicated his life to guiding others. For years, I had been a pillar in my community, providing wisdom, solace, and support to those who sought me out. Moving to this country was supposed to be an opportunity to bring the light of Islam to new shores. My family and I embraced this journey with hope, believing it to be part of Allah's plan. But life, as I knew it, was about to take a turn I never could have anticipated. For decades, my life revolved around the mosque and the teachings of the Quran. From dawn to dusk, I prayed, counseled, and delivered sermons that reminded my congregation of Allah's mercy and justice. People would come to me with their struggles, their doubts, and their fears, and I would remind them of the strength found in unwavering faith. My own faith was unshakable, or so I thought. I believed I was prepared for whatever test Allah had written for me. That belief would soon be tested in a way I never imagined. It began the year I turned 67. I started experiencing sharp abdominal pains that I initially dismissed as nothing more than indigestion. When the pain worsened, my wife insisted I see a doctor. I was reluctant, but I eventually relented, thinking it would be a minor issue. After weeks of tests, scans, and consultations, the doctor delivered the news. I had stage 4 stomach cancer. My world came crashing down around me. The words felt like a death sentence, and yet, in my heart, I knew this was not an accident. It was a trial, a test from Allah, just as Prophet Ibrahim had been tested with the command to sacrifice his son. This was my test, and I vowed to face it with faith and courage. The treatments began almost immediately. Chemotherapy was grueling, an endless cycle of nausea, pain, and exhaustion. My body grew weaker with each passing session, but I refused to give in to despair. Every moment of suffering became an opportunity for prayer. I whispered supplications under my breath as the medication dripped into my veins. At night, when sleep eluded me, I would turn to the Quran, reciting verses that reminded me of Allah's mercy and wisdom. "O Allah," I would pray, "if my time has come, let me meet you in peace." Despite my resolve, there were moments when doubt crept in. The pain was relentless, and there were days when I could barely lift my head from the pillow. I would stare at the ceiling, wondering why this was happening to me. But I reminded myself of the stories of the prophets, of their trials and tribulations, and how they never wavered in their trust in Allah. This was my path, and I was determined to walk it to the end, no matter how difficult. One evening, after a particularly difficult chemotherapy session, I returned home feeling more drained than ever before. As I sat in my chair, a strange tightness began to build in my chest. At first, I thought it was just fatigue, but the sensation grew sharper and more unbearable. My breathing became shallow, and panic set in. I tried to call out to my wife, but the words wouldn't come. The last thing I remember was collapsing to the floor as darkness enveloped me. When I opened my eyes, I wasn't in my body anymore. I was above it, looking down at the scene unfolding below. My wife was crying, her hands clasped over her mouth in horror. Paramedics had arrived and were performing chest compressions on my lifeless body. I should have been terrified, but instead, I felt a strange calmness. How was I here, watching this? Shouldn't everything have ended when my heart stopped? I tried to speak, to tell them I was still here, but no sound came out. I was a silent observer, floating above the chaos. The room seemed to grow brighter, and I noticed a faint light in the distance. It wasn't harsh or blinding, but warm and inviting. I felt an overwhelming urge to move toward it, as if it were calling me. The scene below began to fade, and for a moment, all the pain, fear, and confusion melted away. But this was only the beginning. What lay ahead would challenge everything I thought I knew about life, death, and the truth I had spent my entire life preaching. As I hovered above my lifeless body, the scene before me seemed surreal. The paramedics worked frantically, their voices urgent, but their words felt muffled, as though I were hearing them through water. My wife's sobs cut through the chaos, and I wanted desperately to comfort her, to tell her that I was still here, watching everything unfold. But no matter how much I willed it, my voice didn't reach them. It was as if I were tethered to a different plane of existence, separate but painfully aware. The detachment was strange, yet I felt alive, more so than I ever had before. I wasn't weighed down by my failing body, by the pain or the weariness. I could see everything clearly, feel the energy in the room, even sense the emotions radiating from the people around me. Despite the panic below, I felt an odd calmness. There was no fear, no confusion, just a quiet acceptance of my state. Was this death? If so, it wasn't how I had imagined it. Then, something else caught my attention. A light. It wasn't coming from the room or the medical equipment. It was somewhere beyond, distant, yet beckoning. The light seemed to pulse gently, inviting me toward it. I didn't feel any resistance, only an overwhelming urge to move closer. As I drifted toward it, the scene below began to blur and fade, replaced by a warmth that enveloped me like a soft embrace. As I drew nearer to the light, faint sounds began to echo in the distance. At first, they were indistinct murmurs, but gradually they grew clearer. It was my mother's voice, singing a lullaby she used to hum when I was a child. I hadn't heard that melody in decades, yet it stirred something deep within me, a longing that I hadn't realized was still there. Then came my father's voice, reciting a prayer before the evening had hung, just as he had every night when I was young. These sounds were not just memories, they felt alive, vibrant, as if they were happening right now. The light seemed to hold all the pieces of my past within it. As I moved closer, I saw flashes of my life, moments I had forgotten, small fragments of joy and sorrow. My childhood home, the mosque where I first led a prayer, the faces of people I had counseled over the years. It was as if the entirety of my existence was being laid bare in the glow of that light. I felt no fear, only an immense peace. This is it, I thought. This is the presence of Allah. Tears streamed down my face, not of pain, but of pure, unfiltered joy. I had never felt such completeness, such harmony. But then something shifted. The warmth began to fade, replaced by a chill that crept into the air. The light, once steady and inviting, flickered and dimmed. The comforting sounds of my parents' voices were replaced by whispers, low, unsettling murmurs that seemed to come from every direction. I tried to focus, to hold on to the peace I had felt moments ago, but it was slipping away. The environment around me began to change. The vibrant glow was gone, replaced by a dim, grey haze. The ground beneath me, once soft and warm, turned cold and unyielding. I looked around and saw trees, but they were not the lush, green trees of paradise. These were withered and blackened, their branches twisted and lifeless. The air was heavy with the scent of decay, and every breath felt like an effort. Then came the sounds. They started as faint moans, distant and almost imperceptible, but they grew louder, more piercing. Cries of anguish filled the air, men, women, and even children wailing in pain. The sounds were not just audible, they seemed to seep into my very being, filling me with a deep, aching sorrow. I wanted to look away, to block out the noises, but I couldn't. And then, amidst the cacophony, I heard a voice that froze me in place. It was a woman's scream, raw and desperate. There was something hauntingly familiar about it, and when I realized why, my heart broke. It was my mother's voice. She wasn't singing a lullaby now. She was crying out, pleading for mercy. "No," I whispered, though no sound came from my lips. "This can't be." The darkness around me grew thicker, more oppressive. It wasn't just the absence of light. It was a presence, a void that seemed alive, wrapping itself around me. It smothered me, pressing down on my chest until I felt like I couldn't breathe. I wanted to scream, to run, but there was nowhere to go. In the midst of this darkness, a deep, resonant voice spoke. It wasn't like the whispers. It was clear and commanding, vibrating through the very core of my being. "Omar," it said, "everything will now be revealed." The voice sent shivers down my spine. It wasn't angry, but it carried a weight, a power that made me feel small and insignificant. I didn't understand what it meant, but I knew that whatever was coming next would change everything. This was no longer a place of peace. It was a place of reckoning, and I was at its center. The darkness deepened, consuming everything in sight. There was no ground, no sky, just an endless, suffocating void that pressed against me from all sides. The cries of suffering were now deafening, echoing from all directions. They weren't just sounds. They carried a weight, an unbearable anguish that seeped into my very soul. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and every breath felt like inhaling fire and ash. I wanted to close my eyes, to block it all out, but the horror around me was inescapable. As I moved, or perhaps was pulled through this desolate landscape, shapes began to emerge in the darkness. They were twisted, grotesque forms, their faces contorted in eternal agony. They reached out, their hands clawing at the empty air as though begging for help. Their cries pierced my heart, and I felt their pain as if it were my own. Men, women, children, all trapped in this place of torment, their suffering endless and absolute. I wanted to help them, to reach out, but an invisible force kept me rooted in place. Then, amidst the chaos, I saw it, a throne. It rose high above the desolation, its surface carved with intricate ancient patterns that seemed alive, writhing in the flickering shadows. It was both magnificent and terrifying, radiating an aura of immense power. Yet the sight of it filled me with dread. This throne did not belong in a place of peace. It was a monument to despair. Sitting upon the throne was a figure bound in heavy chains. The shackles wrapped around their wrists and ankles were impossibly thick, their weight pulling the figure downward. Their head hung low, obscuring their face, and their posture was one of utter defeat. I couldn't look away, even as fear gripped my heart. Who was this? Why were they here? Slowly, the figure lifted their head, and my breath caught in my throat. His face was unmistakable. It was the face of Prophet Yusuf, the same figure I had spoken about countless times in my sermons, the man whose story of trials and forgiveness had inspired generations. But here he was, chained and sorrowful, his eyes filled with pain and regret. "No," I whispered, though my voice was barely audible in this place. "This can't be. It's not possible." Prophet Yusuf's gaze met mine, and in that moment, I felt an overwhelming wave of sorrow. It wasn't just his sorrow, it was my own, magnified and reflected back at me. His lips moved, but no sound came out. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but my body refused to obey. All I could do was stand there, paralyzed by the weight of what I was seeing. This has to be a mistake, I thought. He doesn't belong here. He's a prophet, a chosen one. Why is he in this place of torment? The questions swirled in my mind, each one more painful than the last. Had I misunderstood everything I believed in? Had I failed to see the truth? Then the voice spoke again, the same deep, resonant voice that had called out to me earlier. "Omar," it said, "do you see now? Do you understand?" "No," I shouted back, my voice finally breaking free. "I don't understand. Why is he here? Why am I here? This isn't how it's supposed to be." The voice didn't answer, but the darkness around me began to shift. Visions appeared, swirling like smoke before solidifying into vivid scenes. I saw moments from my own life, times when I had preached about faith and salvation, times when I had comforted others with words of hope. But then the scenes changed. I saw moments I had forgotten, moments where doubt had crept into my heart, where I had questioned the very things I taught others. These doubts, though fleeting, now stood before me as undeniable truths. "Why is this happening?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I served you. I devoted my life to you. Why am I being shown this?" The voice spoke again, softer this time, but no less powerful. "You have always sought the truth, Omar, but have you truly found it? Have you truly known me?" The question struck me like a thunderbolt. Of course, I knew Allah. I had spent my entire life in devotion to him. But as the voice echoed in my mind, I realized that I had never truly asked myself that question. Who is Allah? What does it mean to truly know him? The doubts I had buried deep within me began to surface, and I felt as though my very foundation was crumbling. I turned back to Prophet Yusuf, desperate for answers, but his gaze was unwavering, filled with a sorrow that mirrored my own. Tears streamed down my face as I fell to my knees, the weight of everything pressing down on me. "Why won't you speak?" I cried out to him. "Why won't you tell me what this means?" The only response was silence. Silence, and the oppressive darkness that surrounded me. My faith, once unshakable, now felt fragile and uncertain. Everything I had believed, everything I had preached, was being called into question. I felt abandoned, lost in a place where even the prophets seemed to suffer. As I knelt there, broken and confused, the voice spoke one final time. Omar, the truth is before you. Will you have the courage to face it? I didn't know what the voice meant. I didn't know what I was supposed to do. All I knew was that nothing would ever be the same again. As I knelt in the oppressive darkness, broken and consumed by confusion, the voice returned, deeper and more resonant than before. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, reverberating in the very core of my being. Who is God? It asked, the words echoing endlessly in the void. The question struck me like a blow. Who is God? I repeated to myself, my mind racing. I had spent my entire life preaching about Allah, guiding others to understand His mercy, His justice, His omnipotence. Yet here in this strange place, that question felt different, heavier, sharper, as if it pierced through everything I thought I knew. My lips moved to answer, but no words came out. The voice continued, unrelenting. What do you truly know of me? Have you ever questioned what you believe, or have you simply accepted the truth given to you? I clutched my chest, the weight of those words unbearable. Of course, I knew Allah. I had prayed to Him, recited His words from the Quran, and dedicated every moment of my life to serving Him. But now, in this void, those convictions felt shaky, uncertain. The question echoed again, this time louder, more insistent. Who is God? Before I could even attempt an answer, the darkness around me shifted, forming into swirling shapes that began to take on clarity. The shapes became scenes, vivid, almost tangible. The first was of a temple, grand and imposing, its walls adorned with carvings of strange figures. People were gathered there, bowing before idols, their faces filled with reverence. I recognized this immediately. It was pre-Islamic Arabia, the time of ignorance, Jahiliyyah, before the revelations of the Prophet. The idols stood in a circle, each one grotesque and lifeless, yet worshipped as though they held divine power. I knew these figures from the history I had often recounted in my sermons: Allat, Al-Uzza, and Manat, the false gods of the Arabs. But then the voice spoke again, cutting through the scene. Where was Allah in this place, Omar? Was He not among these gods, prayed to alongside them? My heart raced. I knew what the voice meant. Before the revelation of Islam, the Arabs had believed in Allah, but He was considered one God among many, the highest among their deities. They called upon Him in times of great need, yet they still worshipped idols. This historical fact had always seemed distant to me, a relic of ignorance that had been corrected by the Prophet's message. But here, in this vision, it felt disturbingly close, uncomfortably real. The scene shifted again. Now, I saw a different land, a different people. It was the land of Canaan, and the people were gathered around a massive idol. They offered sacrifices, their chants filling the air. I recognized the idol immediately, Baal, the ancient god of fertility and storms. But something about this vision was different. As I looked closer, I saw an inscription carved into the base of the idol. It read, El, El, I whispered, my voice trembling. That name was familiar. It was the ancient Semitic word for God, used in Hebrew and Arabic alike. The realization struck me like a lightning bolt. El, Baal, Allah. Were they connected somehow? Had the name of the one true God been intertwined with the beliefs of those who worshipped many gods? The voice spoke again, piercing through my thoughts. You have never asked, Omar. You have never sought the answers. You accepted what was given to you without question. But now you must confront the truth. I wanted to deny it, to push back against the doubts swirling in my mind. But the scenes kept coming, each one more unsettling than the last. I saw the Kaaba as it had been before Islam, surrounded by idols. I saw people praying to Allah while also offering incense to their other gods. And then I saw the Quran itself, its pages turning rapidly as if unseen hands were flipping through them. The verses I knew so well seemed to glow, their words sharp and clear. The voice spoke again. Have you ever wondered, Omar, who is Allah? What does it mean to know Him truly? Tears streamed down my face as I clutched my head. Stop, I cried. Please, stop. I can't take this anymore. But the voice didn't relent. It grew louder, more insistent, repeating the question over and over. Who is God? What do you truly know? And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the visions ceased. The darkness shattered, replaced by a blinding light. I felt as though I were being pulled upward, sucked through a tunnel of air. My lungs burned, and my body ached as I gasped for breath. My eyes opened, and I found myself staring at the ceiling of a hospital room. The sounds of the world came rushing back, machines beeping, muffled voices, the hum of fluorescent lights. I was back. My body, weak and frail, felt alien to me, as though I were wearing it for the first time. A nurse's face appeared above me, her voice calm but firm. You're back, she said. We almost lost you. The words barely registered. I couldn't focus on her, or the room, or the medical staff bustling around me. My mind was still in that place, still hearing that voice. Who is God? The question echoed endlessly in my head, refusing to let me go. I had returned to life, but I was not the same. The doubts that had been planted in that otherworldly place lingered, gnawing at the edges of my faith. Everything I thought I knew was now in question. My prayers, my teachings, my beliefs, were they enough? Or had I missed something fundamental? As the nurse adjusted my IV and spoke reassuring words, I turned my head to the side, tears welling in my eyes. I didn't know the answers, but one thing was clear. I couldn't ignore the question any longer. The truth, whatever it was, would not let me rest. When I returned to life, everything felt different. My body was weak, my lungs struggled with each breath, but the real battle wasn't physical, it was within me. The question that haunted me in that otherworldly place, who is God, echoed relentlessly in my mind. The visions I had seen were vivid, unforgettable. They weren't fleeting dreams, they were imprinted on my soul. And they left me grappling with a doubt that terrified me. I tried to go back to my old routine. I recited prayers, read the Quran, and went through the motions of daily life, but nothing felt the same. Every word, every verse seemed to demand deeper reflection, as though asking me, do you truly understand? I avoided my family's questions about what had happened during my near-death experience. How could I explain the darkness, the throne, the voice that shook my very foundation? I couldn't even explain it to myself. One morning, after a sleepless night, I found myself sitting in the hospital chapel. It was a small, quiet space meant for people of all faiths, with simple wooden pews and a cross hanging on the wall. As I sat there, staring at the cross, a man entered the room. He wore a white clerical collar and carried a small Bible in his hand. He introduced himself as Father James. "You seem troubled," he said, his voice calm and inviting. At first, I was reluctant to speak. What would a priest understand about my struggles? But something about his presence, his quiet patience, made me feel at ease. Before I knew it, the words started spilling out. I told him about my illness, my visions, and the questions that now consumed me. To my surprise, he didn't interrupt or offer judgment. He just listened. When I finished, he said softly, "You've been shown something profound. It's not uncommon for those who come close to death to question what they've always believed. The important thing is to seek the truth, no matter how difficult it may be." His words resonated deeply. For so long, I had taught others to trust in their faith, yet here I was, struggling to do the same. Father James offered to meet with me regularly to talk and explore my questions together. I hesitated at first, but my need for answers outweighed my pride. As our conversations unfolded, I began to see things in a new light. Father James introduced me to the teachings of Jesus, the idea of grace and forgiveness that went beyond my previous understanding. He read verses from the Bible, and one in particular struck me deeply. "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." Those words pierced my heart. Was this the answer I had been searching for? Around this time, the dreams began. Each night, I saw the throne again, but the figure on it, the prophet, was no longer bound by chains. He stood tall, his expression no longer one of sorrow, but of quiet strength. Each time, he would speak the same words, "Go find the truth." His voice was clear, unwavering, and filled with a sense of urgency. The dreams left me shaken, but determined. I could no longer ignore the path laid before me. After weeks of prayer, reflection, and discussions with Father James, I made a decision that would change my life forever. I asked to be baptized. It wasn't an easy choice. I knew it would alienate me from my family, my community, and the life I had built. But the peace I felt in my heart told me it was the right one. The day of my baptism was unlike anything I had ever experienced. As the water was poured over my head, I felt a profound sense of release, as though the chains that had bound me, both in my dreams and in my heart, were finally broken. For the first time in my life, I felt free. The doubts, the fear, the weight of my past, they all flowed away with the water. Tears streamed down my face, but they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of gratitude and joy. In the days that followed, something miraculous happened. The cancer that had ravaged my body began to disappear. My doctors were baffled, unable to explain the sudden reversal. But I knew who had healed me. Every morning I opened the Bible and fell to my knees in prayer. The words that came from my lips were different now. They weren't cries of desperation, but prayers of thanks. My journey wasn't without loss. My family struggled to accept my transformation. My daughter, in particular, was angry and hurt. She accused me of abandoning my faith, of betraying my role as an imam. It was painful, but I knew that the path I had chosen was one of truth, and I prayed for her understanding. Over time, some relationships began to mend, though others remained strained. Even so, I was no longer afraid of being alone. I had found something greater. Today, I share my story not to convince anyone, but to bear witness to the transformation that is possible when we seek the truth with open hearts. My life is a testament to grace, forgiveness, and the power of faith. I don't claim to have all the answers, but I know this: the peace I now feel, the joy that fills my days, is unlike anything I have ever known. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening to my story. If it's touched you in any way, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more incredible stories of transformation and faith. Check out our other videos for more inspiring journeys. And remember, the truth is always worth seeking.